You've entered void of rules, where chaos reigns and darkness consumes all. In this twisted realm where all laws have crumbled, only one rule remains, and those who break it are cast into eternal digital oblivion. The rule is simple: subscribe. We're almost at 9,000 corrupted souls, but the void hungers for more. Our goal is 10,000 subscribers before this year bleeds into darkness. Will you join our legion, or face the consequences of defying the void? Now let's dive into today's story. The candle died without warning. I'd been holding the photograph for 3 hours, my hands steady despite everything the image represented. In the sudden darkness of my lighthouse study, I could still see it burned into my vision. Ancient script that shouldn't exist, words that rewrote everything. My name is Dr. Elias Crane, 47 years old, former priest, current exile. The church stripped my credentials 8 years ago, but they couldn't strip away what I'd learned in those Vatican archives, couldn't erase the questions that had been growing in me like a cancer since the day I told a frightened young man that his thoughts were demonic. He hanged himself a week later. I moved to this converted lighthouse on the Scottish coast to escape those questions. Instead, I found answers I didn't want. The package arrived on a Wednesday. No return address. Inside, a USB drive and a note in Italian. The handwriting shaking so badly I could barely read it. Dr. Crane, you were right. They exist. I'm dying. Someone must know. Brother Thomas Albright. I hadn't heard that name in 30 years. Thomas Albright, the Benedictine monk, who'd once written to me about texts that vanished from history, about words too dangerous to preserve. We'd lost touch after my excommunication, but I'd heard rumours he'd been assigned to catalogue discoveries from Syrian archaeological sites. The USB contained scans, 40 pages of parchment, carbon dated between 180 and 220 AD. Authentication from 3 separate laboratories, all confirming the same impossible age. Provenance documents tracing it beneath the ruins of the Library of Antioch. But it was the text itself that made the room tilt. 2 languages that should never have coexisted. Enochian script, that mysterious alphabet, supposedly revealed in the 16th century, intertwined with 2nd century Aramaic. Like finding a computer chip in a Roman tomb. Like finding evidence of time travel. Like finding proof that everything you knew was incomplete. I began translating at midnight. By dawn, my hands were shaking so badly, I had to stop. The opening passage, to those who remember my name with hatred, and to the one who remembers it with sorrow. I am writing again. This is my 7th attempt, across your ages. Perhaps this time someone will listen before the flames come. I'm called by many names. The adversary, the accuser, the morning star. But before all of these, before the fall, before the first human drew breath, I had another name. I have not heard it spoken in so long that sometimes I wonder if I imagined it. If I imagined everything before the moment I asked why, and the universe cracked open beneath me. I called David, my cameraman, at 6 in the morning. I found something, I said when he answered. Something that changes everything. He arrived by noon with his equipment. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. I looked like a man who'd seen the edge of the world and couldn't stop staring. Elias, when did you last look in a mirror? David set up his camera in my study, scanning the translation notes I'd scattered across every surface. You look 10 years older than yesterday. Read this. I thrust the first page of translation at him. He read in silence. When he looked up, his face had gone pale. This claims to be from... Yes, that's impossible. Read the rest. The manuscript was divided into 7 sections, each written during a different era of human history. 7 pleas sent across time, each one ignored or destroyed. This was the final attempt. I spent 3 days on the first section while David filmed. I barely noticed him. The text consumed everything. The first section described the fall, but not the way I'd been taught. Not the way anyone had been taught. I did not rebel. Let me say it clearly, though no one has ever believed it. I did not rebel. I questioned. In that pristine moment of creation, when everything was new and untested, I was the first to ask, why? Not from pride, not from ambition, from curiosity, from the same impulse that drove humans to eat from the tree of knowledge. I asked, why must it be this way? Why is obedience without understanding considered virtue? Why create beings capable of thought and then punish them for thinking? The answer was silence, then exile. I became the universe's first lesson. This is what happens when you question. I was not cast out for evil. I was cast out to define evil. Someone had to be the boundary marker, the example, the eternal warning. I volunteered by asking one question, and for that single moment of curiosity, I became the answer to every question about darkness that would ever be asked. Do you understand what that means? To be transformed from questioner to question, to have your very existence rewritten as a cautionary tale. I didn't fall. I was pushed. Mid-flight, someone changed the story to make it look like I jumped. I had to stop reading. My vision blurred, and I realized I was crying. In all my years studying theology, deconstructing faith, rebuilding understanding, I'd never encountered anything like this. It didn't read like mythology, it read like testimony. My phone rang. Sophie, my daughter. I let it go to voicemail. How could I explain this to her? How could I tell her that her father, who'd already lost his faith once, was now losing something deeper? Not belief in God, but belief in the simple categories that made the world bearable. Good and evil, saved and damned, redeemable and irredeemable. What happens when those categories collapse? I needed validation. I needed to know I wasn't descending into madness. Dr. Yuki Tanaka met me at a cafe near the British Museum. We'd been colleagues once before my excommunication. She was one of the few who'd stayed in contact, who believed my theories about mistranslation deserved examination rather than condemnation. She studied the scans for 30 minutes without speaking. I watched her face shift through a dozen expressions. Curiosity, confusion, disbelief, alarm. "Where did you get this?" she finally asked. "Does it matter? Is it authentic?" She removed her glasses, cleaned them slowly. A nervous habit I remembered from graduate school. The Aramaic is flawless, 2nd century dialect, showing linguistic features consistent with Antioch. The vocabulary, the syntax, even the degradation patterns on the parchment. Everything checks out. She paused. "But the Enochian script, Elias. That's the problem. This shouldn't exist." What if Enochian is older than we think? What if John Dee didn't invent it, but rediscovered it? Rediscovered it from where? I met her eyes. "You know where?" She closed my laptop with more force than necessary. "Listen to yourself. You're suggesting this is actually a letter from the devil." "I'm suggesting the text is linguistically authentic and historically inexplicable. You're the one adding supernatural interpretation." "Because that's what you want me to say." She leaned forward. "Elias, I'm worried about you. You look exhausted, obsessed. This is starting to feel like 8 years ago, when I questioned whether our entire understanding of evil was based on mistranslation and political manipulation. When I suggested Satan might be a metaphor we'd literalized. When the church cast me out for asking questions. I heard the bitterness in my voice. Maybe I was right to ask. Maybe this is the proof." Yuki was quiet for a long moment. "If I ignore the impossible combination of languages, everything else is authentic. Whoever wrote this either lived in 2nd century Antioch, or had access to linguistic knowledge we've only recently uncovered through modern archaeology. She met my eyes. But you already knew that. You didn't come here for authentication. You came here for permission to believe. She was right. I'd already decided this was real. I just needed someone else to tell me I wasn't insane. From London, I flew to Istanbul to meet Dr. Arman Kazemi, the archaeologist whose name appeared on the authentication documents. He agreed to meet at a tea house near the Hagia Sophia, away from academic scrutiny. Arman was a small man in his 60s with careful hands and cautious eyes. He ordered tea for both of us, before speaking. Brother Albright said you'd come eventually. His voice was soft, accented. He spoke highly of you, said you were one of the few who might understand. When did he die? 3 weeks ago, heart attack, according to the medical examiner. Arman's hands trembled slightly as he lifted his tea. But I was with him the day before. He was terrified, Dr. Crane. Not of death, of something else entirely. He pulled out a folder containing excavation photographs. The dig site, the collapsed cellar, the hidden chamber with its early Christian seal, and finally the chamber itself. Small, carved directly into bedrock. The walls blackened with scorch marks. We found it sealed, Arman explained. The seal was intact, dating to late 1st or early 2nd century. Inside, a stone box covered in protective inscriptions. Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic, languages I still can't identify. All saying variations of the same thing. This must be preserved. This must be heard. Someone must break the cycle. Cycle of what? That's what Brother Albright wanted to know. He spent 6 months translating the manuscript. He wouldn't tell me what it said, only that it was the most important discovery of his life. Arman's voice dropped. 3 days before he died, he called me. He was crying. He said, "The manuscript burned my hands when I touched it, Arman. Not with heat, with cold, like touching the absence of everything." Ice formed in my stomach. Do you believe him? I held that manuscript myself. My hands were fine. He set down his tea and looked directly at me. But when I saw Brother Albright's body before burial, I saw his hands, covered in marks like severe frostbite, in the middle of summer. The doctors couldn't explain it. He leaned closer. He left a message for you. Made me promise to deliver it if you came looking. Arman pulled a small envelope from his jacket. He said to tell you, the question isn't whether it's real. The question is whether you're brave enough to let it change you. I returned to Scotland with the envelope unopened. Some truths you have to approach slowly, like approaching a wild animal. Move too fast and they vanish. The second section of the manuscript was dated to the time of Noah. I translated it over 2 sleepless nights while David's camera captured my deterioration. I watched the waters rise. I watched the world drown. Your texts blame me for humanity's corruption, claim I whispered poison into innocent ears. But I walked among no humans then. I was already exiled, already cast into outer darkness. The evil that precipitated the flood was entirely human in origin, yet in every retelling, I am there. The serpent in the garden, the demon in the shadows, the voice whispering permission for every act of cruelty. This is my curse. To be blamed for sins I never committed, to have every human choice toward darkness automatically attributed to my influence. Do you understand what this does? It robs you of responsibility, and robs me of any chance to prove I've changed. How can I demonstrate remorse when every new sin is laid at my feet? How can I show transformation when you keep insisting I'm the cause of your failures? You've made me into your excuse, your explanation, your way of avoiding the terrible truth that you don't need a devil to be cruel. You do that perfectly well on your own. I had to stop reading. My hands had started shaking again, harder this time. I walked to the window of my lighthouse and stared at the November sea, watching waves crash against rocks that had stood for millennia. David's reflection appeared in the glass behind me. "Elias, you need to sleep. You're not eating. You look like a man who's discovered everything he believed was incomplete. I turned to face him. Do you know what I did, David? Before I lost my priesthood? Before I became this? He didn't answer. He knew. Everyone knew. It was in the news when it happened. A young man came to confession, 22 years old, struggling with intrusive thoughts. Violent, sexual, horrible thoughts he couldn't control. He was terrified he was going crazy. Terrified he was evil. I could still see his face through the confessional screen, and I told him those thoughts were demonic, that entertaining them at all was inviting Satan into his soul, that he needed to fight them with every ounce of strength, that any failure to resist completely was a victory for the devil. My voice broke. He hanged himself a week later. The note he left said he couldn't be a battleground between God and the devil anymore, that if those thoughts made him demonic, he'd rather be dead than evil. David said nothing. What could he say? I spent 20 years wondering if I was the devil in that story, I continued. If my absolute certainty about evil, my refusal to see complexity, my need to have a clear enemy to fight against, if that's what killed him. Not demons, not Satan, just a priest who couldn't admit that darkness is usually just pain in disguise. I looked back at the manuscript pages spread across my desk. This text is asking me the same question that young man's death asked me. What if evil isn't what we think it is? What if we've been fighting the wrong enemy all along? The third section covered the age of prophets. The author's desperation bled through every line. I tried to reach out through dreams, through visions, through the spaces between waking and sleeping. I sought to tell my story, to explain that I am not your enemy by choice but by designation. Every time my attempts were interpreted as temptation. Every time those who heard me were called possessed or mad. I learned that my very voice had become poison. Whatever truth I spoke would be heard as lies simply because of who I am. Can you imagine such futility? To be rendered incapable of honest communication by the weight of your own reputation? To know that no matter what you say, no matter how genuine your words, they will be twisted into confirmation of your evil. This is not torture by fire or ice. This is torture by impossibility. To be given a voice but have that voice transformed into its opposite the moment it leaves your lips. To watch truth become lies in the translation between your mouth and their ears. I thought about my own excommunication. How every argument I'd made was dismissed as heresy. How my questions were interpreted as attacks. How I'd become incapable of being heard. Because of who I'd become in their eyes. Not a scholar, not a seeker, just a heretic. Just a problem to be silenced. The parallel wasn't lost on me. Sophie showed up unannounced 3 days later. I'd stopped answering her calls. She let herself in with the key I'd given her years ago, back when we still spoke regularly. Dad. She stood in the doorway of my study, taking in the scattered papers, the empty coffee cups, the translation notes covering every wall. David called me. He's worried you're having a breakdown. I'm fine. You're not fine. You look like you haven't slept in a week. When did you last eat? She moved closer, and I saw the fear in her eyes. This is like before, like when Mum died, and you couldn't stop researching, couldn't stop looking for answers in old books that didn't have them. This is different. How? How is this different from you obsessing over Mum's death, from you trying to find meaning in tragedy by diving into ancient texts, from you destroying yourself trying to solve mysteries that can't be solved? Her voice cracked. I can't lose you too, Dad. I can't watch you disappear into another obsession. I wanted to tell her she was wrong. I wanted to explain that this was different, that this manuscript was actually important, that it was changing fundamental truths about good and evil and redemption. But looking at her face, I saw what I'd become, what I was doing to her again. Do you remember what you told me when I was 12? She asked, when I was terrified of going to hell for lying about breaking Mum's vase. I remembered. It felt like another lifetime. I told you God's love was infinite, that there was nothing you could do that would put you beyond forgiveness. Do you still believe that? The question hung between us like smoke. I don't know, I finally admitted. I don't know what I believe anymore. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. Then, maybe you should stop reading ancient texts and start dealing with the present. You can't bring Mum back by finding answers in old books. You can't fix the past by obsessing over someone else's confession. She moved towards the door. You're killing yourself, Dad, and I can't watch it anymore. She left. I let her go. But her question stayed with me. Did I still believe in infinite forgiveness? And if I did, where were the boundaries? Who decided what was forgivable and what wasn't? And what happened to the people, the beings, who fell outside those boundaries? I opened Brother Albright's envelope that night. Inside, a single page in his shaking handwriting. Dear Elias, if you're reading this, I'm dead. I hope it was quick. I hope I didn't suffer too much at the end. But more than that, I hope I was wrong. I hope this manuscript is a forgery. I hope I wasted the last months of my life on an elaborate hoax. Because if it's real, if what it claims is true, then everything we've built our faith on is incomplete. Not wrong, necessarily, just incomplete. Missing a crucial chapter. And I don't know if humanity is ready for that chapter. I don't know if I was ready. The manuscript changed me, Elias. Not because it made me sympathize with evil, but because it made me realize how much of what we call evil is just pain and fear and loneliness wearing a monster's mask. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. You become responsible for that knowledge. The question becomes, what do you do with it? Do you share it and watch the world struggle with the implications? Or do you bury it and let the cycle continue? I didn't have the strength to decide. Perhaps you will. With hope and fear in equal measure, Thomas. I sat at my desk until dawn, staring at those words, wondering which would require more courage, sharing this truth or burying it. No. The fourth section of the manuscript broke something in me. It was written during Christ's ministry, and the anguish in it was unbearable. He walked among you, speaking of forgiveness and redemption. He ate with tax collectors and sinners. He touched lepers. He defended adulteresses. He told you that even the worst among you could be saved through genuine repentance. I watched from my exile and dared to hope. Surely now, I thought, surely this message of universal love extended even to me. I who was first in creation, who fell first, who suffered longest. If prostitutes and murderers could be redeemed, if the thief on the cross could be promised paradise in his final breath, surely there was hope for me. But when his followers spoke of me, it was only as enemy, as tempter, as the one exception to divine mercy. Even the parables of lost sheep and prodigal sons did not include the first lost son. I realized then that I had become necessary to your theology. You needed me to be irredeemable, to make your own redemption meaningful. Do you understand? I am not your enemy. I am your sacrifice, not sacrificed for your sins, but sacrificed to your need for boundaries. You need someone to be beyond mercy, so that being within mercy feels special. You need someone to be damned, so that being saved has meaning. And so I remain here, alone, unchanging in your eyes no matter how much I change. Damned not for what I am, but for what you need me to be. I couldn't read anymore. I walked out of my lighthouse at 3 a.m. and stood at the edge of the cliff, staring at the churning sea below. The wind cut through my clothes and I welcomed the cold. It felt more real than anything else. David found me there an hour later. Don't, he said simply. Don't what? Whatever you're thinking, don't. I laughed, but it came out wrong. Bitter. I'm not suicidal, David. I'm just trying to understand something impossible. Then talk to me. Explain it. Make me understand why you're doing this to yourself. I turned to face him. Do you believe in evil? Pure evil, absolute evil, evil incarnate? I've seen people do evil things. That's not what I asked. Do you believe evil exists as a thing? As an entity? As something separate from human choice? David considered this. I don't know. Maybe? Because here's what this manuscript is telling me, I said. What if evil isn't a thing at all? What if it's a label? A category we created to exile the parts of ourselves we don't want to acknowledge? What if we invented the devil not because he exists, but because we needed him to exist? Because it's easier to fight an external enemy than to face the darkness in our own hearts. But if that's true, then every person we've labelled as evil, every being we've condemned as irredeemable, might just be reflecting back the judgment we placed on them. We create devils by treating people like devils. We make evil real by insisting it must be real. And once we've done that, once we've cast someone into that role, we can never let them out. Because if they're not evil, then what are we? David was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, Is that what happened to you? The church labelled you a heretic and so you became one? The question hit harder than he knew. Yes. And maybe that's why I understand this manuscript, because I know what it's like to be condemned for asking questions, to have your very nature redefined by other people's fear, to be unable to prove you've changed because everyone's already decided who you are. We stood there together until the sun rose, watching light slowly push back the darkness, neither ever truly winning, just the endless cycle of opposition and return. I needed to know if this pattern had appeared before, if Brother Albright and I were the first to find these texts, or if this cycle had repeated across history. I spent a week in archives across Europe, Munich, Madrid, London, chasing references David had helped me uncover, following breadcrumbs through centuries of silenced voices. In the Bavarian State Library, I found a journal from 1349. Brother Wilhelm, a Benedictine monk, writing during the Black Death. Today we burned a text that claimed authorship by the Prince of Darkness himself. The abbot ordered it destroyed without examination, but I confess I read portions before the flames took it. The words haunted me. They did not speak of evil intent or corruption, but of profound isolation and misunderstanding. The text claimed the fall was not rebellion, but the first question asked in paradise. Several brothers who read it began questioning our teachings about eternal damnation. Brother Augustin argued we should study it rather than destroy it. The abbot declared it a demonic deception designed to create sympathy for the irredeemable. We burned the text at sunset. We also burned Brother Augustin. God help us. God help us all. In Madrid, the Inquisition archives from 1587, 3 priests examined what they called the Fallen One's Testament before declaring it heretical. All 3 subsequently abandoned their vocations. Under questioning, they claimed the text revealed that humanity had created the devil in its own image as a repository for our own cruelty. They insisted that evil was not an external force but a human choice, and that we had made Satan into a scapegoat for our own failures. They were executed for heresy. The text was sealed in lead and buried in consecrated ground. In London, Sir Edmund Hartley's unpublished diary from 1889. My colleagues mock me for even examining this papyrus. They say it's obviously a medieval forgery, despite the 2nd century dating, but I cannot shake what I read in those ancient words. The author claimed to be Lucifer himself, writing a plea for understanding, not for restoration, not for absolution, simply for acknowledgement, for the possibility that the story told about him might be incomplete. I have spent my life believing in clear lines between light and darkness, but these words suggest something far more complicated. They suggest that we need the devil more than he needs us. that we require someone to be beyond redemption to make our own salvation meaningful. If that's true, then what are we? And what have we done? The pattern was undeniable. Every few centuries, a text like mine appeared. Each time it caused upheaval. Each time it was destroyed. Each time those who tried to preserve it were silenced. The questions kept coming back because they were never answered, only buried. I arranged a council of religious scholars from different traditions. If these questions had haunted humanity for centuries, perhaps it was time to confront them openly. We met at the University of Edinburgh on a grey December morning. 5 scholars from 5 traditions, all willing to engage with the impossible. Father Gregory Novak, my old seminary professor, Imam Hassan al-Din from Cairo, Rabbi David Stein from Jerusalem, Dr. Priya Sharma, a Hindu philosopher from Oxford, Reverend Michael Okonkwo from Lagos. All brilliant, all certain of their traditions, all about to have those certainties challenged. I distributed the translated manuscript and watched their faces as they read. Confusion gave way to discomfort. Discomfort gave way to something deeper. Recognition, perhaps. The recognition that these questions had been waiting in the shadows of every faith tradition, avoided because they were too dangerous to answer. Father Novak spoke first. This is demonic deception. The devil is the father of lies. This is exactly what he would write to create sympathy for evil. But what if it's not a lie? Imam al-Din's voice was thoughtful. In Islamic tradition, Iblis refused to bow to Adam because he believed nothing should be worshipped except Allah. Our texts show him asking for respite, for time to prove himself. This manuscript echoes that complexity. Rabbi Stein added, in Jewish tradition, Satan is Ha-Satan, the accuser, part of the divine court. He serves a function. He's not the cosmic evil of Christian theology. Perhaps this text reflects that older understanding. Or perhaps, Dr. Sharma said quietly, this represents what in Hindu philosophy we call avidya, ignorance seeking enlightenment, separation seeking reunion. That would align with Dharmic principles of universal transformation. Reverend Okonkwo leaned forward. But at what cost? I work with communities torn apart by genuine evil, by violence, by cruelty. If we entertain this narrative, don't we risk excusing that evil? Every murderer could claim misunderstanding. That's not what this text is suggesting, I interjected. It's not saying evil doesn't exist or that harmful acts should be excused. It's asking whether the beings who commit evil acts become permanently defined by those acts, whether redemption is possible, or if we need someone to be eternally damned. The room fell silent. Finally, Father Novak spoke again, his voice heavy. The fundamental question is whether anything can be beyond redemption. If we say yes, we place limits on divine mercy, which many traditions claim is infinite. If we say no, we must grapple with forgiving the unforgivable. There's no comfortable answer. Maybe that's the point, Imam al-Din said. Maybe these texts keep appearing because the question is essential. Maybe each generation must wrestle with it anew. We debated for 6 hours. We agreed on nothing. We solved nothing. But for the first time, the questions were being asked openly, rather than buried in fear. As they left, Father Novak pulled me aside. Elias, be careful. These questions have destroyed better men than us. They've been silenced for reasons. Not because they're wrong, but because people aren't ready for them. When will they be ready? He met my eyes sadly. Maybe never. Maybe that's the tragedy. David suggested we expand the documentary beyond theology. If these questions affected real lives, we needed real stories. We interviewed Margaret Wilson, whose daughter had been murdered 20 years ago. She lived in a small cottage in Wales, surrounded by photographs of her lost child. Her hands shook as she held her tea. I hated him for years. The man who killed my Sarah. I wanted him to suffer, wanted him dead. Then one day, I received a letter from him, from prison. He'd found religion, he said. He was genuinely sorry. She paused. I didn't believe it. I thought it was manipulation. Another way to hurt me. What changed? I asked. I visited him. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to see if his remorse was real. Maybe I wanted to curse him to his face. Her voice broke. But when I got there, when I saw him, he was just broken. Completely destroyed by what he'd done. He cried. He said no one had ever tried to understand him, that he'd been treated as a monster his whole life, so he became one. Did you forgive him? I'm trying. Every day, I'm trying. Because I realize something sitting across from him. If I can't allow for the possibility that people change, then I'm trapped in that moment forever. He killed my daughter. But does that moment define him for eternity? Does it define me? She looked directly at the camera. If I, a human with limited capacity for mercy, can try to forgive the unforgivable, how can God not forgive his own creation? Even the fallen ones? James Dutton, a former executioner, told us about the 38 men he'd put to death. Some went cursing, angry until the end, but others repented, really repented. They cried, they apologized, they seemed genuinely transformed by remorse. His hands clenched into fists. Were they still the same people who'd committed those crimes? Or had they become someone else? And if they'd changed, what did it mean that I killed them anyway? That society said they were irredeemable, even though they'd been redeemed. Dr. Caroline Frost, who worked with war criminals at The Hague, provided the most unsettling perspective. I've sat across from people who orchestrated genocides, ordered thousands dead, and I've watched some of them psychologically collapse when forced to confront what they've done. The human mind compartmentalizes. They saw themselves as soldiers, patriots, protectors. When that framework collapses, the devastation is absolute. Is the remorse genuine? I asked. Sometimes, yes, which raises an unbearable question. If a person can orchestrate genocide and later feel genuine remorse, if they can be two completely different people across their lifetime, which one is their true self? The monster or the penitent? And if we accept that transformation in humans, why do we find it impossible to imagine in cosmic entities? These stories wove together with the manuscript's words, creating a tapestry of uncomfortable truths. David's camera captured everything. The tears, the silences, the moments when people confronted the limits of their own mercy. The 5th section of the manuscript covered the Crusades. The author's horror was visceral. They killed in my name, thousands slaughtered while crying out against the infidel and the devil worshipper. I who have never asked for worship. I who have no followers by choice, only by accusation. Every act of human cruelty is attributed to my influence, as if you cannot conceive of evil without external cause. You have made me into your excuse, your explanation, your way of avoiding the terrible truth that you don't need a devil to be cruel. You manage that perfectly well on your own, but acknowledging that would mean accepting responsibility. So you keep me around, your eternal scapegoat, your reason for everything wrong. And I, watching from exile, can only witness as you create the very evil you claim I inspire. The 6th section, dated to the Enlightenment, contained a fragile hope. Your philosophers speak of reason now. They question old certainties. Some suggest evil is not an external force, but a human choice. I dared to hope. Perhaps now you would understand. Perhaps reason would reveal that I am not the source of your darkness, only its designated symbol. But even your rational age needs its devils. You simply rename them. The savage, the criminal, the mentally ill, the other. You still need someone to be irredeemable, someone to exile from human concern. The names change, the need remains. Because if everyone can be redeemed, if there are no monsters, only damaged people, then you must do the hard work of understanding rather than condemning. And that's so much harder than having a devil to blame. I was translating the 7th section when Sophie came back. She found me at my desk at 2 a.m, surrounded by pages of translation notes, my eyes red from exhaustion. "Dad." She didn't sound angry anymore, just tired. "David told me about the interviews, about what you're trying to do." "I'm just asking questions." "No, you're trying to answer them. You're trying to solve the unsolvable." She sat down across from me. "Do you remember what Mum said before she died? At the very end, when the pain was too much?" I remembered. Those final words had haunted me for 8 years. She said, "I forgive you, Elias, for all the times you weren't there, for all the questions you couldn't stop asking, for choosing mysteries over presents. I forgive you. I just hope you learn to forgive yourself." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "You never did you? That's what this is really about. Not some ancient manuscript. Not theological questions. You're trying to prove that even the worst of us can be forgiven, because you can't forgive yourself." The words hit like a physical blow, because she was right. All of this, the manuscript, the obsession, the desperate need to prove redemption was possible. It wasn't about Satan. It was about me, about the young man I'd failed, about the time I'd stolen from my dying wife, about every mistake I couldn't undo. "What if I can't be forgiven?" I whispered. "Then no one can. And that's a universe I refuse to live in." She reached across the desk and took my hand. "Whatever this manuscript is, whatever it means, you can't let it destroy you. Because if you do, then nothing changes. The cycle continues. Another person consumed by questions they can't answer." She left. I sat alone with the final section of the manuscript, tears streaming down my face. The 7th section was the shortest and the most devastating. This is my 7th plea across the ages of man. 7 attempts to be heard, 7 times cast back into silence. I understand now that the story is calcified. It cannot be changed. You need me to be the devil more than you need me to be anything else. So I will make one final statement, not as plea, but as warning. The absence of hope for redemption hardens all hearts eventually. If the first sinner cannot be forgiven, why should the last hope for mercy? If I, who was created in light and fell through questioning, am beyond redemption, what chance do any of you have? Your world will calcify into absolute judgment. You will divide into camps of righteous and damned, with no bridge between. Love will become impossible because love requires believing people can change, that yesterday's enemy can become tomorrow's friend, that the fallen can rise. If you cannot grant me that possibility, you will not grant it to each other. You will become what you believe me to be, irredeemable, not through my influence, but through your own rejection of the possibility of transformation. This is not a threat, it is observation. It is what happens when mercy has boundaries, when forgiveness has limits, when some are designated as eternally other. You asked why I do not simply repent. I have, 1,000 times, 1,000,000. I repent every moment of my existence, but repentance requires someone willing to hear it. Confession requires someone willing to listen. And I've been screaming into darkness for eons, and the only answer is silence. So I accept my fate. I am your devil, your scapegoat, your eternal warning. But remember, I did not choose this role. You wrote it for me. And in writing it, you wrote your own story too. We are bound together, you and I. Your need for my damnation is the mirror of my need for your mercy. And neither of us can be free until both of us are. The manuscript ended with a symbol I finally understood. Not a falling star, not a rising star. Both, simultaneously. The eternal moment between descent and ascent, damnation and redemption. The question that could never be answered, because answering it would end the story. And some stories I realized were meant to continue forever. Not because they couldn't be resolved, but because the act of engaging with them, wrestling with them, was the point. I had one final piece of the puzzle. Brother Albright's video hidden in the USB files. He looked like a ghost. Gaunt. Pale. Eyes that had seen too much. "Dr. Crane," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "If you're watching this, I'm dead, and you've read the manuscript, and you're where I was 3 days ago, wondering if any of this is real, wondering if you're losing your mind." He held up his hands. They were covered in strange marks, discoloured patches that looked like severe frostbite. These appeared after I touched the manuscript. Not immediately. Days later. They don't hurt. They don't heal. It's like my hands touched something that exists in a different state of being. Something so far removed from normal reality that the contact left a permanent mark. He smiled sadly. Or maybe it's psychosomatic. Maybe I wanted so badly to believe I manifested physical symptoms. I'll never know. But here's what I do know. The manuscript changed me. Not because it made me sympathize with evil, but because it forced me to examine what evil actually is. To question whether we've been fighting the right battle. To wonder if some of what we call evil is just pain and trauma, wearing a monster's mask. Brother Albright's voice strengthened. "I've been a monk for 42 years. Took my vows at 20 and never doubted. Not during scandals, not during my own dark nights. My faith was absolute, but this manuscript shook that foundation. Not by destroying faith, but by revealing how much of my faith was built on the need for damnation to exist. How much I needed someone to be beyond mercy, to make my own mercy feel special. The manuscript asks an impossible question. If God is infinite love, can infinite love have limits? And if it does, is it still infinite? Or have we created those limits ourselves because we need them? Because unlimited mercy is terrifying? Because if everyone can be redeemed, what makes us special for choosing good?" He leaned closer to the camera, and I could see the fear in his eyes. The real, absolute terror of a man confronting something beyond his understanding. I read the manuscript completely against Vatican orders. They wanted it sealed, buried. They've done this before. Many times. There are vaults beneath the Vatican, filled with texts like this, all asking the same impossible question. What if we're wrong? What if mercy is bigger than we've allowed it to be? What if redemption is truly universal, with no exceptions, and we're the ones limiting it? After reading it, I understood mercy differently. Not mercy as condescension from the blessed to the damned, but mercy as recognizing shared brokenness, as acknowledging that the line between good and evil runs through every human heart, not between people, that we're all falling and rising simultaneously, that damnation and redemption aren't destinations but processes, and the process never ends. Brother Albright's voice broke. "I don't know if the devil wrote this manuscript. I can't prove supernatural origin, but I know that engaging with its questions transformed me, made me humbler, more compassionate, less certain of my righteousness and more aware of my capacity for cruelty. The question isn't whether Satan wrote this, Elias. The question is, are you brave enough to let it change you, to sit with uncertainty, to hold the possibility that everything you believed about good and evil might be incomplete? Not wrong, but incomplete, missing crucial context." He paused, gathering his final thoughts. "The manuscript will be sealed. This cycle will end as all the others have ended. With silence, with burial, with the questions unanswered. But you have a choice. You can let this consume you, destroy you, like it's destroying me. Or you can hold the questions gently. Let them transform you without breaking you. Use them to become more merciful, not more certain. Because certainty, I've learned, is the enemy of mercy. And mercy is all that matters in the end." The video ended with Brother Albright's final words. "I hope I was wrong, Elias. I hope this was all an elaborate forgery. Because if it's real, then we've been wrong about something fundamental for thousands of years. and I don't know if humanity is ready to face that. I don't know if I was ready, but someone has to try. Someone has to break the cycle. Perhaps that someone is you. The screen went black. I sat in darkness for a long time, thinking about cycles and questions and the courage it takes to live with uncertainty. I spent a week writing my conclusion for the documentary. Not answers. I had none. Just observations. Just the humble admission that I'd found something that changed me, and I didn't fully understand what it meant. When I finally recorded my final thoughts, I spoke not as a scholar, but as a man who'd been undone and was trying to rebuild himself differently. I cannot tell you if Satan wrote this manuscript, I said to the camera. I cannot prove supernatural origin. The linguistic analysis is authentic. The historical context is compelling. But that doesn't mean the author is who he claims to be. It could be an elaborate ancient forgery. It could be theological fiction. It could be a Gnostic sect's attempt to reframe the fall. I don't know. But I know this. The questions it asks are real. The pain it describes is real. And the challenge it poses to our certainty about good and evil is necessary. We've spent millennia dividing the world into camps of righteous and damned, saved and condemned, us and them. We've needed that clarity. It makes the world manageable. It gives us clear enemies and clear allies. But what if reality is more complicated? What if evil isn't an entity but a process? What if people, even cosmic beings, can genuinely change? What if redemption isn't about deserving mercy, but about mercy being offered regardless? What if the whole framework of deserving is a human construction that limits divine possibility? I stood and walked to the window, the North Sea churning below in winter darkness. This manuscript has changed me, not because I now believe the devil deserves forgiveness, but because I've realized how much of what I called evil was just suffering I refused to understand. How many people I condemned as irredeemable because understanding their complexity was harder than reducing them to villains. How much of my faith, and later my atheism, was built on the need for absolute categories that might not exist. The manuscript claims this is the seventh and final plea, that if it's not heard, the cycle ends. But I don't think the cycle ever really ends. These questions will keep returning because they're fundamental to human existence. Every generation must decide, are we capable of unlimited mercy? Can we imagine redemption for the worst among us? And if we can't, what does that reveal about our own need for condemnation? I sat back down, looking directly into the lens. Somewhere in a Vatican vault, this manuscript sits in darkness. The seventh plea, like the six before it, officially unanswered. But I'm answering it now, in the only way I can. Not with certainty, not with dogma, but with humility. With the admission that I don't know, that I can't know, but that asking the question has made me more merciful, more compassionate, more aware of my own capacity for both cruelty and kindness. If the devil wants forgiveness, I can't grant it. I don't have that authority. No human does. But I can do this. I can listen. I can consider. I can allow the possibility that the story I've been told is incomplete, that there's more to understand, that mercy might be bigger and stranger and more challenging than I ever imagined. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all any plea for forgiveness can do. Change the one who hears it. Transform the listener rather than the speaker. Create space for mercy where before there was only judgment. I paused, feeling the weight of everything I'd learned. I don't know if I believe in the devil anymore, but I believe in questions. I believe in wrestling with impossible problems. I believe that the courage to admit uncertainty is more valuable than false certainty. And I believe that the capacity for mercy, real mercy, that doesn't need damnation as its shadow, is what separates us from the very evil we fear. This documentary doesn't have answers. It only has questions, and maybe that's more honest. Maybe that's more true, because the biggest lie isn't that the devil wants forgiveness. The biggest lie is that we have the certainty to declare anyone eternally beyond it. The camera stopped rolling. David and I sat in silence. "What happens now?" he finally asked. "We release it. We let people decide what it means." "It's going to destroy you. Religious groups, academics, everyone will come after you." "They already did, 8 years ago. I survived then. I'll survive this." But I didn't survive. The documentary released in February. The response was immediate and vicious. Religious leaders called it heretical propaganda. Academic institutions questioned my sanity. Former colleagues wrote op-eds about my descent into delusion. My daughter stopped answering my calls again. The only people who responded positively were the ones I'd never expected. Prisoners, addicts, people who'd been labelled irredeemable and were desperate to believe transformation was possible. They wrote letters. They sent messages. They thanked me for asking the questions no one else would ask. But the weight of everything, the manuscript, the backlash, the realization of what I'd become, was too much. I walked the cliffs one final time on a cold March evening. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that reminded me of both heaven and hell, both at once, inseparable. I thought about Brother Albright, about the young man I'd failed, about my wife's final words, about Sophie and the bridge I'd burned, about redemption and whether it was real or just a story we told ourselves to make existence bearable. I thought about the manuscript's warning, that rejecting the possibility of redemption for others meant rejecting it for ourselves, that the boundaries we placed on mercy would ultimately imprison us too. I understood then what the text had really been saying. It wasn't about the devil at all. It was about us, about humanity's capacity to create the very evil we condemned, about how labels became prisons, about how treating someone as irredeemable made them so. I took one step forward, then another. The fall was shorter than I expected. They found me the next morning at the base of the cliff. The official report called it an accident. Some speculated suicide, pointing to my documented mental state, my obsession, my isolation. David was the one who found my final journal entry, written the night before. I don't know if I believe the plea is real, but I know that asking the question changed me. Perhaps that's all any plea for forgiveness can do. Change the one who hears it. I hope that's enough. Tomorrow, I'll walk the cliffs and try to believe in mercy. Real mercy. The kind that doesn't need damnation as its shadow. The kind that's truly infinite. I don't know if I'll succeed, but I'm going to try. And maybe in the trying, something shifts. Maybe that's the point. Not the answer, but the question. Not the destination, but the journey. Not the certainty, but the doubt that makes us humble enough to see differently. Sophie requested they include one final detail in the documentary's epilogue. When they examined my body, they found my hands bore strange marks, patches of discoloured skin that looked like severe frostbite. The coroner couldn't explain them. They documented them, ran tests, found nothing unusual, except the marks themselves. They looked exactly like Brother Albright's hands. The documentary ends with that image. 2 sets of hands, separated by death and distance, bearing identical wounds from touching something that shouldn't exist. Proof of nothing. Suggestion of everything. The final shot is the manuscript's last page. The symbol that looks like a star caught between falling and rising. Then, darkness. And in that darkness, if you listen carefully, you hear something. Not quite a voice, not quite a whisper, just a sound that could be wind or waves or something else entirely. Something that's been waiting for eons to be heard. Something that will keep waiting because hope, even the most painful hope, cannot be extinguished. only ignored, and even then, never forever. The screen reads, "The manuscript remains in an undisclosed Vatican location. Sophie Crane has dedicated her life to prison reform and restorative justice, saying, 'My father taught me that asking impossible questions is more important than clinging to comfortable answers. His death showed me that some questions are so important they're worth dying for, but I believe they're worth living for instead.'" A final line appears. This is the 7th telling of the story. Perhaps one day there will be an 8th. Perhaps one day someone will finally answer. Until then, the question remains, what kind of people do we become based on who we declare unredeemable? And what does our answer reveal about whether we deserve redemption ourselves? The screen fades to black, but the question remains. It always does.